Welcome, everybody, to the Brickyard podcast, back from vacation. We're here to talk about the NFL draft, which just commenced this past weekend. We'll have the NBA playoffs in the thick of it. We'll also be going over WNBA and a whole lot more. You don't want to miss it. Welcome back.
Yeah, welcome back, and I'm excited to be here. We had so many things happen in sports. We have the NFL draft going on, and my favorite time of the year outside of the NFL playoffs, definitely the NBA playoffs going on. So many storylines, kind of seeing the young youth take it away from LeBron, take it away from Kevin Durant, and kind of say, hey, this is our league right now, and we are looking at the development of a new NBA and a new era is being ushered in before your eyes, like what happened and started on Thursday night in Detroit with the NFL freaking draft. And we have at number 1, Caleb Williams going to the Chicago Bears. They did it. Did they finally get a guy who can throw for more than 3,600 yards a year and maybe go over 4,000 and be the best Bears quarterback in history? Not in year 2, not in year 3 like we see with some of these quarterbacks, but in year 1.
Well, I mean, he's got not 1, not 2, but 3 great receivers: Keenan Allen, DJ Moore, and now Rome Odunze. They got DeAndre Swift at running back. They addressed the offensive line. On the other side of the ball, Montez Sweat. We saw how that defense came on last year. So I think it would be honestly a disappointment if he didn't throw for 4,000 yards and break every single record that they've had to this point. So I think the Bears found their guy. And if he ends up panning out in the NFL, they're going to be really good for a while.
Yeah, they will be really good for a while because not only do you have Keenan Allen, who is not your 1, not your 2, but he's probably your number 3 or 4th option, because not only do you have 3 really good receivers with Romeo Odunze, DJ Moore, kind of all at different points in their career, where we have the guy who's kind of still hitting his prime in DJ Moore. We have the veteran in the room in Keenan Allen, and he doesn't need to be on the field every single time, and we can keep him healthy for the playoffs. And then we have Romeo Odunze, who's going to be able to learn from DJ Moore, learn from Keenan Allen, and then you have all 3 of those guys. And then, oh yeah, we forgot about Cole Kmet. Cole Kmet, who is the luxury, the most underrated tight end. We were talking about him being the most underrated tight end in the league 3 years ago. And then last year, we see articles popping up everywhere about Cole Kmet being the most underrated tight end in the league. And oh yeah, you got some killers on defense in the draft as well. This might be the year the Bears do something. All you need to do is actually put a bear on your helmet, update your uniforms. Why are we Bears but blue? But overall, this team has a pretty good chance. Really, the only one who can mess this up at this point is probably the head coach at this point.
Yeah, it's whether or not you believe in Matt Eberflus. It gives me a little bit of optimism to see how they played down the stretch, because they did go on a bit of a run at the end of the season. And Justin Fields, it seems like throughout his career, we didn't really know exactly how he was going to pan out. And I guess we'll find out in Pittsburgh. But I think Caleb Williams, much better prospect. He kind of gives me that Trevor Lawrence, Andrew Luck mentality. That's kind of the prospects he was compared to. And even if he is at the floor of Trevor Lawrence, he's going to be the best quarterback the Bears have ever had. Because before then, we're looking at Jay Cutler, we're looking at Justin Fields, and we're looking at Kyle Orton.
Yeah.
So exciting to see how they are. And I think we finally are about to see the Bears finally be what they're capable of.
Yeah. And not only that, this might be the best division, dare I say, in football. Not only do you have Jared Goff, still a fairly young quarterback, but the Lions address some issues at corner. You take 2 corners with 2 very high draft picks, trade into the first round to get their corner. And then you also have the Packers, steady, reliable. We saw what Jordan Love did last year. He was looking like Caleb Williams towards the end of the season. And then you have the Vikings, also putting together some pieces right now where you're like, okay, their offense actually might be better than what it was last year if JJ McCarthy isn't Zach Wilson.
Yeah, and I didn't really love them getting JJ McCarthy, but for him, he seems to me like he's going to be one of those quarterbacks. Maybe he's someone like a Brock Purdy, or maybe a Jimmy Garoppolo, Ryan Tannehill figure, where he's just going to be a game manager. And with that team, when you have Aaron Jones, Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, and TJ Hawkinson, and as long as their offensive line can be decent, I mean, he probably has the best supporting cast. Maybe Caleb Williams, you can argue at this point, but head coach as well, Kevin O'Connell, he's a great head coach as well. So, I mean, all they need him to be is just anywhere between 11 and 15, and then he'll be fine as far
Yeah.
as best quarterbacks in the league.
Yeah, and the thing I like too is you replace Danielle Hunter, you trade up with Atlanta in this draft. I'm not saying it's what Houston is last year because obviously CJ Stroud is a lot better than JJ McCarthy will ever dream of being in his career. But you trade up, you get Dallas Turner, you get your edge rusher there, kind of replace some of that mojo that you lost, where Danielle Hunter was really the only piece on that defense you could look at and go, wow, I saw that guy play defense and he's a great player. So I think that's going to be really good. And now you're not paying a quarterback. You're not paying your best player on defense if Dallas Turner pans out. So I think the Vikings, it all depends on JJ McCarthy. And I'm not here to rip a guy early and declare him to be a bust unless we know all the situations are aligning for him to be a bust, because what you do have is an offensive minded head coach, two really good wide receivers, you have a really good tight end, and now you have Aaron Jones, who is a great pass catching running back, which is the formula to have a successful rookie quarterback.
Yeah, and I think he's going to be fine. Um, Compared to the rest of that division, I mean, that team I definitely have the most questions with.
Yeah.
But overall, I think on the offensive side of the ball, the only real question mark is JJ McCarthy. But I think he'll be fine. I think Kevin O'Connell can do a Kyle Shanahan level coaching experience where he can get him to be efficient. And I think as
Yeah.
long as he's efficient, then that team can at least compete for the wild card.
Do you think my theory with JJ McCarthy is like, first of all, national champion. People are like, okay, Jim Harbaugh's talking him up. But do you think the Brock Purdy experiment in San Francisco, similar build, doesn't have the biggest arm in the world, but what he will do, he has the work ethic, he has the intangibles, and he has maybe, I don't know, the processing power to expedite himself a little bit into that starter's role? Or do you think it's not necessarily a situation because Brock Purdy had no expectations to be good, where JJ McCarthy is going to get picked apart with where he was taken?
So I think that it's less about him being taken aside, but I think that seeing the success of Brock Purdy and a lot of the critics think of him as a more limited quarterback. All he really is he's efficient and he makes the right decisions. And if JJ McCarthy can be Brock Purdy, then the Vikings will be very good. So I think that the success of Brock Purdy, not even necessarily where he was drafted, but just the amount of success he's had with that talent around them, I think the Vikings see their situation and their offense and they're like, if we can get Brock Purdy level production, then we're going to be a pretty good football team. And I think that's part of the reason why JJ McCarthy was drafted so high, as well as all these other quarterbacks falling or just getting drafted as quickly as they were.
Yeah, definitely, because this was the most offensive players taken ever in this draft in the first 26th, the first round,
The first round, there was 23 players taken that were offensive players.
which is wild.
The first 14 players were offensive players, which is
Yeah.
a record in this draft. So this draft is already historic. You had 3 straight quarterbacks taken, and then we saw Michael Pennix fall to the Falcons at 8. So all of these players off the board very quickly. A lot of great talent. I mean, we talked about Dallas Turner going to the Vikings. He was projected to go in the top 10.
Yeah.
He falls because of all of these players and how they fall in line.
Yeah, and then the Vikings got themselves a great piece there. So really excited to see how the NFC North plays out there. But let's shift over to the second pick, and that's Jaden Daniels. He goes to the Washington Commanders. Commanders offseason for me is a little bit of a mixed bag, because on one hand, you did sign a lot of guys, but it seemed like you signed a lot of older veteran players that were willing to go there and kind of getting their last contract. And then Jaden Daniels is a guy who will let himself get hit, maybe needs to work on some of his throwing ability, and he relies on running a little bit too much. But with the right coaching, guidance, and direction, I think he could be a great NFL quarterback, completing the most passes in college last year of 20 plus yards, which is a great stat to have. Do you think Dan Quinn and Cliff Kingsbury are the right guy to steer Jaden Daniels and the Commanders and make something out of this?
I'm kind of indifferent on it because I think that in this draft, I mean, I'm not in love with his running abilities. I mean, not his talent wise, but as far as the way he runs and the way he takes hits, He reminds me of RG3 and AR-15, Anthony Richardson, where they are talented and they have a big arm and they're very mobile. But if they're going to keep taking hits like they are, then his career, I hope this doesn't happen, but it could end very shortly. And especially with these quarterbacks, we see about half of them fail in the first round. And he's one of those guys that it seems it's just a little too eerily resemblant of the RG3 experience about 10 years before.
Yeah.
So I am nervous about it. And I'm also not in love with Cliff Kingsbury as an offensive coordinator. I'm not in love with Dan Quinn as the head coach. I don't think Dan Quinn's a bad head coach, but he's kind of in the Mike McCarthy bubble. And so I'm a little nervous. Their offensive line is also not great. They have decent weapons around him, but at the same time, I don't know how it's all going to gel together. There's a lot of question marks there.
Yeah, it's definitely probably some of the most question marks because, like, with the Commanders, I still don't know what I'm getting yet. I get it's new ownership, but on one hand, you're still the Commanders. You still look like an XFL organization. You still have sewage leaking in your locker room. You're still
Yeah.
named after FedEx. So it's like until there's like more substantial moves made, I think this project with the Commanders is probably going to take 3 to 5 years, and he could be a Josh Allen quarterback where it takes him about 3 years until they really get him the dude at wide receiver. But the problem is with his running style and his reliancy on it, you got some absolute trucks in your division, starting with Kayvon Thibodeau. Micah Parsons can dish out some punishment. And now Philadelphia loading up on their defensive line already had some pretty nice talent inside. It's like there's going to be some guys in your own division that can lay you out, not to mention Bobby Okereke.
Yeah, no, that's my thing. It's like in that division, you have all these great defensive players. And you also have Jalen Carter on the Eagles side as well. So it's like got a lot of big dudes. And then you look at the rest of that NFC, a lot of big players in play. So it does make me very nervous. We talk about history on this show an awful lot. Talk about half of these guys not panning out. He seems like one of those guys where the ceiling is high for him, but also the floor is also very low. So
Yeah.
it'll be interesting to see how he pans out. He's got some weapons, a lot of question marks as well.
Yeah, a lot of question marks there. Definitely the right pick. I was always a fan of the Commanders taking Jaden Daniels because Drake May just seemed like a Patriot.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think he's a great fit in New England. Not to be this guy, but Patriots fans, not us, but other fans, they have a certain type of quarterback that seems to consistently be there for them. You can read between the lines there, but Drake May in New England, he's got the Josh Allen comparison. He's got a big arm. He's mobile. It's refreshing for a team that has had a lot of average quarterbacks the last 5, 6 years or so. I think that this is a move in the right direction. They have new head coaching now. So it feels good. I think that he could be pretty solid, but they need to address his weapons around him, which they did in the draft to some extent, but will they pan out is the major question.
Yeah, for me, it's like it doesn't really matter if they pan out because you still need two other good receivers. Because I think even if you're 1 for 2 of the receivers you took in this draft, you still need a 2, a 3, and a 4. And then also, we're in a situation where Ramondre Stevenson had one of the best years of his career. He got hurt last year, so there's some question marks with Ramondre Stevenson. And no, Antonio Gibson is not the answer. And now we have Austin Hooper. I mean, how many teams has Austin Hooper played for at this point? I've lost count because you can't count them all on one hand. That's how often this guy's bounced around the league. And then you have the best version of Austin Hooper on your team, which is Hunter Henry. So you do have some weapons around him, but until you get that guy for him, it's going to be a struggle for the Patriots, and it probably will be similar to Josh Allen, where struggles year 1, struggles year 2. Then once you realize, okay, we do need to go out there, get a Stephon Diggs, get a AJ Brown, then his career will take off. Because like for me, it's like you still have the ability to go out there and get a wide receiver where T. Higgins is still asking for a trade. They were in talks about trading for Deebo Samuel. Let's see where that goes. It seems like the 49ers talked to Brandon Ayuk and they're like, Deebo's getting a little bit old, has been a little banged up. So maybe Deebo is going to be the guy on the way out the door because Brandon Ayuk is younger and faster at this point. So they think going forward, that's the best future for the 49ers. So if you can get like a Deebo Samuel or T. Higgins, or just wait for another one of these receivers to be unhappy, then I think it can work. But for the Patriots, it's like, I have no idea what to expect for this team because we have not seen the Patriots without Bill Belichick in, I don't know, 2 decades, 2.5 decades. It's been
Not
like
in our lifetime.
25 years. And then also, who was the last great quarterback they didn't draft by accident? Drew Bledsoe?
Yeah.
Drew Bledsoe.
Yeah, which was 30 years ago.
Yeah.
And so we haven't even seen this Patriots. We haven't seen the Patriots without Bill Belichick in our entire lifetime.
Yeah.
So there's so much uncertainty here. If the Patriots are smart, what they'll do is they'll run it with Jacoby Brissett for that first year. There's no rush for them to start him when
no.
you know you're not going to compete with the Jets, Dolphins, or Bills, even with all the Bills issues that they've had. You're not going to be competing. You'll easily be the worst team in that division, and it's a long-term rebuild. So don't play him the first year. Second year, see what you have with him. Let him go through the growing pains, and then get him an actual wide receiver. They say that the 49ers, the current report is either Debo or Brandon Ayuk will most likely be gone by 2025. So go after one of these guys. If I had my choice, I would go with Brandon Ayuk just because of the health. Debo Samuel is great, but how much wear is on his tires at this point?
Yeah.
But get one of these guys. Maybe it's T. Higgins. Maybe you sign somebody in free agency, get some weapons around him, and then when it comes time for him to actually play, you have the weapons around him so that he can succeed. Just like you'll see with Caleb Williams, just like you'll see with J.J. McCarthy and these other guys.
Yeah, and then you just said something, too, that will never happen. Sign somebody in free agency because there is a tax for sucking that the Patriots are not willing to play. And the rule is, hey, your franchise sucks. Your weather sucks. The people, 50-50, whether or not you like people from New England, but they can suck. The drivers there suck. It's not the best food in the world. It's kind of a weird mix of like a college city, and then everyone else thinks the town is the greatest movie ever made. So and then the Patriots just aren't willing to pay that extra luxury tax for sucking. So it's either trade for a guy or draft a guy. And you're bad at drafting receivers, at least under Belichick. We don't know this new regime, but you're not going to sign one. And Robert Kraft has been a problem under Belichick not being willing to pay. And it seems like part of Belichick's like, okay, get rid of a guy early here was to make Robert Kraft happy.
Yeah. So if that's the case, like of these guys that are kind of in the mix for wide receiver, which one do you think would help elevate him the most? And that being Drake May.
T. Higgins. Because T. Higgins has proven that without Jamar Chase on the field, he's a top 10 wide receiver and the numbers back it up. It's not even a conversation. Like Brandon Ayuk could be really good. He has had some injury issues where T. Higgins is a number one bona fide. He's not in the Kyle Shanahan system, and it's been Joe Burrow getting him the ball. Someone with a cannon of an arm like Drake May would be a great fit with T. Higgins, and I think T. Higgins has the ability to be as good as some of these top wide receivers. Maybe he's not quite as good as Stephon Diggs, but I think he could scratch that ceiling at least.
Yeah, I think that's a good comparison because I was thinking about that when Stephon Diggs moved on from Minnesota. Right, they had Adam Thielen there at the time, and they were looking to replace him because they didn't want to pay him that big contract. In comes this slightly unproven Josh Allen, and then next thing you know, they have their success that they did. So I think that you get Drake May, someone like a T. Higgins, and then maybe one of these guys succeed. I kind of did like some of the receivers that they drafted. They drafted Jalen Polk, and then a later guy in the 4th round. He looks like he could be promising. But you never know. I mean, once you get past that 2nd and 3rd round, there's a lot more uncertainty, and we'll see how they pan out. But I do like them in the right direction going with Drake May.
Yeah, I think it's the right, like you went for a quarterback. It's like the only other person besides Drake May would be Marvin Harrison. But the Cardinals made the right decision there. They didn't trade away the 4th pick. They said, nope, we're going out there, getting Marvin Harrison. A lot of people are trying to do a Brickyard take and be like, oh, the Cardinals are going to be the Texans of next year. And I will say no, because Kyler Murray is not texting you about film at midnight like CJ Stroud is. Kyler Murray is texting you about Fortnite or Call of Duty, asking you to hop on, unlike CJ Stroud. But I do think it's a great pick.
Oh my God. I'm extremely excited to see him and Kyler Murray chop it up there because he's going to be an instant top, at the minimum, top 10 wide receiver, I think. It's in his DNA. He's got great intangibles. I see him coming in, just like a Jamar Chase, where he immediately comes in and has 1,300 receiving yards, and it's just electric. And it's going to be great for them, honestly. I mean, granted, he's going to be double covered a lot because their second receiver isn't the greatest, but great pick for them, and he's going to be electric right away.
Yeah, I think he'll be electric right away. And I do like that Murph from Impractical Jokers was able to elevate an undermanned defense last year where like we don't really know who too many of these guys are, but they're playing hard, they're fighting for their coach, which is really inspiring. And then you have someone like Marvin Harrison where Kyler Murray is more like a Ben Roethlisberger, where he's uber talented, not necessarily the leader of the team, but enter Marvin Harrison. Now you have a leader on offense who could step in, be one of the best receivers in the league, and if he has the right characteristics, he could really take on that leadership role of being the guy to rally, pull everyone together, making ridiculous catches. Maybe he goes out there and levels a corner, makes his entire team go crazy on the bench. But I think that's awesome because he takes some of the spotlight off of Kyler Murray, where we're not just focusing on him, and then we're focusing on what Marvin Harrison Jr. is also doing because he's going to be the star of the offense now.
Oh, 100%. I think that if they're smart, they'll build around Marvin Harrison, and then good things will happen.
Yeah, good things will definitely happen there. So excited for the Cardinals. It's going to be some fun football to watch there with that team next year. And then the Chargers, you took an offensive tackle. You needed an offensive tackle, and you drafted one at 5. You made the right pick, but you said it best. Whenever the tackle is drafted, you're just like, oh, well, I guess they needed one, right?
Yeah, I mean, Joel, he's the best tackle available. You needed a tackle, and now you have the best tackle in the draft. Look at that.
Yeah.
Very cool. It is very underwhelming though. Like
Yeah.
watching the NFL draft and you're looking for your team's pick, and then they draft a tackle. You're like, "Oh, cool. That's cool, I guess." You know? Like it ends up being great for them, and I think it will be good. You pair him with Rashawn Slater, their offensive line should be a lot better now because he should be instantly a very good tackle, potentially a Pro Bowl tackle his first year. But it's an offensive lineman. Like, how excited can you get about an offensive line? It's probably the most boring position to draft.
Yeah. It's like, okay, you could be with a rapper and you'll have a nice life there. Could be with like some sort of celebrity, be able to be taken care of, or you could just be with a stockbroker who has a good career, a high credit score, will be like a good family guy. It's like, okay, that's something that maybe you needed in your life, but at the same time, it's kind of like, call me a casual in the comments, bring it on. But I just think offensive tackles, whenever it's called, it's boring. Even though I understand it's one of the most important positions on the field.
Yeah, and if it's in financial terms, it's like the bond of the investment world. It's like
Yeah.
it's not sexy, but it works, I guess. Cool. Awesome.
And sometimes it'll default on you.
Well, nowadays, yes.
Nowadays, yes. So that's cool. Speaking of a sexy pick, Malik Neighbors is now a Giants player, and Daniel Jones is his quarterback there. And I don't care, and I've said this multiple times, who the Giants draft. I said I didn't care if they drafted Marvin Harrison Jr. You still have Daniel Jones on your team. And if you're a player in an organization or anyone, even if you're a ball boy, the person cleaning equipment, you're going to be a little bit more depressed in your day when you think about, oh, yeah, I work for the team that thought it was a great idea to give Daniel Jones $160 million, and we couldn't get out of it for 2 years. And it's still Daniel Jones as your quarterback. So hopefully he can get Malik Neighbors the ball. Do I think he will? Probably not. But I think Malik Neighbors could still have a pretty good year if they started Tommy DeVito.
I was gonna say, I mean, we didn't really love Wandell Robinson or Jalen Hyatt when Daniel Jones was throwing them the ball. But surely enough, when you get a guy who can actually throw the football, you're like, oh, these guys are actually not too bad. So Malik Neighbors, I mean, he was the second or third best prospect, depending on which draft board you were looking at. And Giants take him. So now all they need is somebody to actually throw him the ball. Unless if he can somehow find a way to throw it to himself, then maybe that'll be a lot more promising.
You know what it's like? It's like when you have a friend who like lives in an apartment that's like $1,200 a month for rent, and he buys a sports car, and you're like, why? You live in a crappy apartment in a crime-infested neighborhood. Why are you buying a sports car? And you're like, oh, but I thought it would be cool. I'm like, yeah, but why don't you, I don't know, get a better house first?
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, now we have a sexy sports car and Malik Neighbors, but we still live in a crappy apartment because Daniel Jones is our quarterback.
Yeah, it's like driving a Maserati in Compton, honestly. That's what it's like.
Yeah.
So,
Shout out Compton.
shout out Compton, Church's Chicken.
And then we had another tackle taken.
Riveting.
The Tennessee Titans. Well, they had the worst offensive line in the league, so you needed a tackle, and you took a tackle, second best tackle in the draft, and now the Titans' offensive line is better than it was before, which was the worst offensive line in the league.
Yeah, they needed a tackle. They drafted a tackle. They have a better tackle depth chart now, so great. That's awesome. Good for you.
Good for you. And then coming up next, we have Cam Newton's favorite pick of the draft, notorious Kirk Cousins hater. Cam Newton was ecstatic when he found out at number 8, the Atlanta Falcons draft Michael Pennix.
Yeah, see, this one we weren't expecting whatsoever. And I've really tried to contextualize this pick and be like, and try to feel them out and see maybe why they picked what they did. And I still can't because they just gave Kirk Cousins $180 million over 4 years. I understand they can get out of it in 2 years, and he is coming off an Achilles injury, but you needed defensive players. At this time, Dallas Turner was available, who was considered the best edge rusher in there, or even Latu Lutu, who ended up going to the Colts. But instead, you take a guy who isn't going to be playing for a minimum of 2 years, who's coming off of a major injury, and also you could use you're in a division that you could easily win. Shouldn't you draft somebody in the first round, especially as high as you're drafting, somebody who's immediately going to come in and step in for you?
Yeah.
No, they say no. So Falcons drafting decisions already in question here. Is Michael Pennix going to be good? Who knows? But this is not who you should have taken at number 8.
You know how this would have made sense? If Kirk Cousins was on the Atlanta Falcons for the past 10 years, and then he was just coming off a Achilles injury, and they're like, oh, maybe for some insurance, we should draft Michael Pennix. Totally get that. You know what you shouldn't do? Sign a quarterback to a bunch of money, bring him into your organization, think like, oh, wow, we went 7-10. That was with some pretty crappy quarterback play. Now we got Kirk Cousins, who's the definition of slightly above average quarterback play. We feel like we're going to win the division. The Bucs barely won the division last year. They're probably going to be a little bit worse this year. And then let's ruin that by not even consulting Kirk Cousins. And then you saw the image of the GM trying to stop the owner from immediately firing him and then seeing if he could somehow get his pick back from Roger Goodell. The owner didn't look like he was that happy. And now you have Michael Penix Jr., who's not going to make an impact for 3 years, who also has injury issues. So if you're worried about Kirk Cousins' Achilles injury, well, Michael Penix has had 2 knee injuries and I believe a neck injury as well. And I think he's a great fit for Atlanta, but if you knew you were going to take Michael Penix, I don't know, how about you suck for another year, get someone like a Jacoby Brissett, and then you can draft Michael Penix. Okay, you have a plan for your future, suck next year while he rehabs, gets his body right, and then you'll have another high first-round draft pick that you can either trade for a wide receiver or draft a wide receiver. All of those things make more sense than signing an older quarterback to $160 million, and then you won't even know if Michael Penix is the guy or is reliable until a year or 2, so he'll only have 1 or 2 seasons to prove himself, which is kind of my problem with drafting a guy that's not going to play for at least potentially 4 years. And then his contract year is the next year, so you really only have one body of work under for tape to actually know if Michael Penix is someone you want to sign long term.
Not only that, but by the time he actually plays, he's going to be in a retirement home because he's already 25 years old. So he's the 3rd oldest player in NFL history to be drafted in the first round. The other 2 guys are Chad Pennington and the infamous Brandon Whedon. And how did those guys pan out? Not too great. They could have taken who they ended up taking the very next pick, Roma Dunze. I look at their wide receiver core for the Falcons. I say, Drake London, he's pretty good. Who's their number 2? They have Kyle Pitts, who we don't know is great or is not great. We don't know yet. And then Bijan, they could have gone and got a wide receiver there and been a lot more successful. So this pick, even if it does work out, and even if it is like a Jordan Love pick where it ends up aging okay at the end of it, it's still a nightmare.
Yeah. Can you have waited 2 years though?
Yes, you could have waited till next year at least. At least with the Jordan Love pick, it's like Aaron Rodgers was in year 16. He had just come off 2 back MVPs, and they
Yeah.
already had a really good roster. So it made a little bit more sense. We definitely bullied that pick for a long time, especially when Jordan Love was struggling. But at least that made more sense. We don't have we have Kirk Cousins coming in, not being consulted, the 8th overall pick with a guy who has injury issues and is already 700 years old. So it's like, I just think this is going to fail. I
Yeah.
think this is going to be a bust. I hope not. I always wish the best for these players, but he's going to be a bust.
Yeah, I hope not. It's just a weird situation, and it's like a culmination of a lot of things with the Atlanta Falcons there. So definitely a head scratching pick. And again, to my point before, if Kirk Cousins was on your team for a while and you hadn't just signed him, and you're like, okay, coming off of Achilles injury, makes sense. But now you just bring in another quarterback with injury issues. I'm like, okay, what exactly are we doing here? At least wait till the second round. But you're in win now mode. Like the owner wants to win. You've been 7-10, 7-10 for the past few years. It's time to actually either get the second best receiver in the draft or third best in Roma Dunze or the best defensive player where you could have gotten Dallas Turner at this point or Byron Murphy.
Yeah.
So that was the Falcons pick. Then we had Roma Dunes, covered that a little bit, covered a little bit of JJ McCarthy. The Jets, they had a bad offensive line last year. What they did with their 11th pick was they're like, you know what? We have a bad offensive line. One Fushibana is available. And they're like, we should take him to protect our quarterback. And we're like,
That's the right move. Great move. Bad offensive line. Draft a good offensive lineman. They now have a better offensive line. Love the pick. They needed to do that. Bad offensive line. Better now.
Yeah. Bo Nix to the Broncos. Apparently the Broncos were kind of shifting the Vikings towards JJ McCarthy to trade up for him because they really like Bo Nix. They thought he was the guy. They basically read him a bedtime story, gave him the playbook, and then told him everything to do. And they're like, wow, we read him a bedtime story. He fell asleep. Check. We gave him the playbook. He followed it. Check. Took him through a walkthrough and he walked through. Check. We think he's the guy.
I knew before the draft, I'm like, you know who's going to end up with Bo Nix? The Broncos.
Yep.
Because Bo Nix defines just Denver quarterbacks since Peyton Manning. He's just the most Denver Broncos quarterback. And now I'm not saying whether or not he's going to be good or bad, because ultimately, what can Sean Payton do with him? He's got a decent track record. I'll give him the benefit of the doubt. But Bo Nix is a Bronco, and it makes far too much sense. And for those who are in Denver and those who know the Denver Broncos quarterback lore, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And I don't need to elaborate any further with this pick. All we know is that things happen in this world, and sometimes it is a coincidence, and sometimes it is just destined to happen. And this was destined to happen. Bo Nix is now a Bronco, and it just makes sense.
Amen. Yeah, destiny awaits. Destiny also awaits for the Las Vegas Raiders, who now have Devontae Adams, Jacoby Myers, Michael Mayer, and enter in the fold Brock Bowers, the best tight end in the draft, potentially the best player in the draft. We said he was either going to the Colts or the Raiders. I was like, imagine just the power of having Max Crosby on your defense with Tyree Wilson. And then also on the other side, you have probably the equivalent of Max Crosby at tight end at this point with Brock Bowers. He can do it all. He can block, make plays. And now with Gardner Minshew, who is throwing to the tight end Mo Alley Cox last year, Michael Pittman, Devontae Adams at this point in your career, kind of a coin flip. And then it's Jacoby Myers. You have Antonio Pierce, who is back there. This is the Raiders reborn one of the best picks in the draft, maybe my favorite pick of the top 13 draft picks right now. Holy cow, the Raiders actually might be the second best team in the division.
Oh, I think they are the second best team in that division. And I think Brock Bowers, he's one of those guys that as soon as he steps in, similar to what I mentioned with Marvin Harrison, he's going to step in and immediately be a top 5 tight end in the league immediately. And I think that pairing him with Michael Mayer is great. I think that he can block, he can run, he's athletic. And I think that Gardner Minshew is a good enough quarterback to get him that ball and make that offense pretty effective. Because, I mean, they really, I mean, as long as they can address the running back situation, which is a big question mark, everything else around them is pretty solid. They have great receivers. They have the tight end. Gardner Minshew is a good bridge quarterback. And that defense, I think, is going to be a lot better. So this is a team that I think can definitely make the wild card at this point.
Yeah, I think the Raiders are definitely in that conversation at this point because Gardner Minshew proved that he could at least get you a chance to make the playoffs. And I think this offense could be on par with the Colts, but I think the difference this year will be the Raiders defense is going to be really good. And then Gardner Minshew's personality kind of fits the vibe of that organization where you have Max Crosby calling him a little ass boy. Then you bring in that little ass boy to be your quarterback, potentially over Aiden O'Connell, or who can at least mentor someone like Aiden O'Connell. So I'm looking forward to it. Raiders definitely have a bright future ahead of them with Antonio Pierce. The only thing they're really missing is that bona fide quarterback, but we'll see. We've seen Nick Foles get to a Super Bowl, so anything can happen. And then at number 14, the Saints needed a roster and a new salary cap. And you know what they said? They're like, you know what? Our offensive line was bad last year. And they're like,
It was.
great idea. We have this great tackle, Tylese Fuaga from Oregon State. And they're like, we should draft an offensive tackle in the first round at number 14. And now their offensive line is better.
Yeah, they had a bad offensive line last year. Very bad, some may say. Their tackle position, pretty weak. And now they drafted a good tackle. And now that tackle position is better. So ideally, their offensive line is now better because of the addition of Fuaga.
Yeah, because of the addition of Fuaga. And then we get into the draft, and it kind of starts to flow here. Who right now, though, we had some interesting things happen. The Eagles definitely loaded up, but there are 3 teams in my mind left worth talking about. The Chiefs, Bills, Cowboys. Which one do you want to talk about?
Let me talk about, well, we can talk about the Chiefs and the Bills at the same time because the Bills, once again, they haven't learned their lesson. Just like with OJ, they never learned their lesson. They traded their pick at 28 to the Chiefs so that the Chiefs can take, I don't know, the fastest 40-yard dasher of this draft? No. Of all time. Of all time. They said, hey, you want Xavier Worthy? You remember when you had this guy, what's his name? Tyreek Hill. Remember how fast he was? Here's another guy who might be faster than him. Here you go. Palm of your hand. You can have this pick. They go out and take Xavier Worthy, who I think is going to be a home run pick for the Chiefs. And then the Bills trade back and they take Keon Coleman. Xavier Worthy, Keon Coleman. Who passes the name test? The fastest player in the 40-yard dash ever or Keon Coleman? So how do I feel about the Chiefs and Bills trade? You tell me. Chiefs, fastest player ever. Last time they had the fastest player ever. What happened? Oh, yeah. Tyreek Hill. And then Keon Coleman.
It's also called Don't Shit Where You Sleep. Like, honestly, because one thing is true is that the Bills and the media will always try and put the Bills in the same conversation as the Chiefs. The Bills are trying to overcome the Chiefs. The one thing you don't want to do is help the Chiefs. Like, at this point, what are you doing? Because not only do you need one receiver, you still need a 2. You still need a 3, and you still need a bona fide 1. You have 2 good tight ends now with Dalton Kincaid and Dawson Knox, so that gives you some wiggle room to maybe only have 2 good receivers on the field. Then you have those guys like the Shaker on the field. However, when you are the Buffalo Bills going through a national tragedy, which is the death of OJ Simpson, and you still refuse to put a monument up. And then also last time you traded with the Chiefs, they got Patrick Mahomes because of it. And now you're giving them the next potentially Tyreek Hill, or at least someone who's really fast that Andy Reid can drop a bunch of plays for, because who else did they get this year? Hollywood Brown, pretty fast receiver. Who else do they still have? Rashee Rice. And suddenly the NFL world has woken up and they're like, oh, the Chiefs were rebuilding the last 2 years that they won the Super Bowl, and now they have potentially the best offensive weapons they have ever had. Ever. That's with Tyreek Hill, but it was just Tyreek Hill and just Travis Kelce. And then you had your McCole Hardmans who would do like fuck all when it mattered. And then they didn't have a running game, but wait, we have Pacheco now. Now we have the fastest wide receiver in combine history. We have Hollywood Brown, who can be an absolute dog if he's your third option, because Rashee Rice and Travis Kelce are your one and your two. Oh yeah, they still have Chris Jones. They still have Andy Reid. They still have Patrick Mahomes.
George
So
Karlaftis.
not only were the Chiefs the most vulnerable they have ever been the past 2 years, but the Buffalo Bills made them the most dangerous they have ever been.
And this is where it gets to rivalries, right? The Red Sox and Yankees. How often do they make trades? Not very often. Why? Because they fucking hate each other. Because for a large portion of the history, the Red Sox got shit on by the Yankees every single chance they could.
Yeah.
The Dodgers and Giants, for a large portion of the history, was the Dodgers owning the Giants. So you know who didn't make many trades with the Dodgers? The fucking Giants.
Yeah.
Now in this situation, you have the Bills, who have had the 13-second game. They had the missed field goal. They've had nothing but heartbreak. They had a blowout in the AFC title game as well. You want to talk about a team that has torn out the spirit and soul of Buffalo, New York? It is the Kansas City Chiefs. Of any team that you want to compare them to, or if you want to compare, try to find a combo of teams that have broken one team's heart as many times as the Chiefs have broken the Bills. There isn't any team in the NFL.
Yeah.
So you at 28, who, by the way, need a wide receiver because you lost this guy. Maybe you've heard of him, Stephon Diggs. He's out the door. You also lost Gabe Davis, coin toss Gabe. You lost him. And now your number one receiver is Khalil Shakir. Doesn't pass the name test for a number one receiver. And you have this guy at number 28, Xavier Worthy. What do we know about Xavier Worthy? Oh, yeah, the fastest guy in combine history. You think maybe Josh Allen could have used Xavier Worthy? You think maybe he would have liked him at number 28?
Yeah.
No, the Bills needed another 2 picks so that they could draft another wide receiver. And now they have Keon Coleman. So the point of this whole take is don't make trades with the Chiefs. The last time they got the greatest quarterback of this generation, and now they have this guy who I think is going to probably pan out because he's with Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes. Don't make trades with the devil. You don't do it.
Yeah.
If you're the Bills, the Chiefs are the devil.
Yeah. The Chiefs are the devil, and it's like, did the Celtics and the Pistons ever make trades in the 80s and 90s? No. Did the Knicks make trades with the Chicago Bulls when Michael Jordan was kicking their ass? No, they didn't. Do the Steelers and Ravens even pick up the phone? Probably not. Just to laugh at each other, maybe. But yeah, this is awful for the Bills. And I don't know, when you're in a division where the Miami Dolphins, okay, they lose Christian Wilkins, but they use that money to, I don't know, fill every hole on their defense. Now you're drafting an edge named Chop Robinson? You want to talk about a guy that passes the name test? How about Chop Robinson?
He chops.
He chops, and he's about to chop down Josh Allen, because who the hell is this guy going to throw to? If Aaron Rodgers is there, and if Drake May plays well, and if one of the receivers for the Patriots is actually good, the Patriots actually have a shot to potentially be better than the Bills, because You can't have how many heartbreaking losses can you have with one head coach with Sean McDermott? We've been banging the drum talking about Sean McDermott 4-5 years ago, where I was like just watching the Bills play. I'm like, I don't think this guy can actually make in-game adjustments. And I don't think this guy's actually the motivational coach or the brain everyone says he can be. I think he can turn around a franchise, but he's more of a Brad Stevens than he is a Ime Udoka, where he's going to just walk up to the ownership and be like, yeah, I'm here to fuck. That's not Sean McDermott.
No. And I mean, at this point, I feel like the way he's going to motivate this team is calling homage to an old Bill star and showing up in a white Bronco with God knows what behind him.
Yeah.
Somebody look out for Sean McDermott's wife. That's all I'm going to say. But again, I'm going to reiterate this again. Do not make deals with the devil. And they did. So the Bills, anything that happens to the Bills in the next year or two is deserved because of shit like this.
Yeah, and it's crazy that the Kansas City Chiefs might have the best offense they've ever had. And it's not crazy to say because their best running back under the Andy Reid, Tyreek Hill, Travis Kelce era was Clyde Edwards-Helaire, potentially. Like Clyde Edwards-Helaire, woof. But now you have Pacheco. You have Rashee Rice, who is going to be one of the best twos in the league. You have Travis Kelce now under a new deal. And then Hollywood Brown was one of my favorite offseason signings because I saw what he did in Arizona when there was just no help there. And I saw him get 14, 17 receptions in some games. And this is going to be a guy that's going to thrive in the Chiefs system. Now you get the fastest guy in the league. Look out, NFL. And if this guy is good, I'm sorry, Texans, but you're not beating this Chiefs team unless you can pull out some magic on that defensive side. But what we learn when the best quarterback has some of the best weapons in the league and he still has Spags on that defense, you still have Chris Jones there. I know they lost L'Jarius Sneed, but damn, the Chiefs are still out there getting the best weapons, the fastest weapons. Some may say the best weapons in league history with Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce. It's like, okay, the Chiefs are going to make the Super Bowl next year. We get it. Who is going to lose to them? That's really the question now. Because I think they have a real chance of three-peating. And honestly, I'd be surprised if they didn't, because I think that's honestly on Patrick Mahomes' mind. Because, like, if he doesn't, like, outside of three-peating, what else can you really do to, like, overcome Brady? But they're giving him the weapons to overtake Brady Super Bowl-wise. Because if he gets 3 now, then he still has his 30s to win 3 more.
Yeah.
To tie him. All he would need to do is go to some cursed team like Cleveland, maybe the Chargers, and then resurrect their history. But the league should be terrified of the Chiefs. Who they shouldn't be terrified, though, you may ask? The Cowboys. Oh, I have a joke for you.
Okay.
And it's it's one of those Jimmy Kimmel jokes. So
Okay.
the Cowboys.
Okay. That's the joke. The
Oh,
Cowboys.
Oh, I'm not Jimmy Kimmel. I don't have a laugh cue there where you're supposed to clap and cheer for me. But yeah, the Cowboys. So instead of drafting a running back after losing Tony Pollard, where they have no depth on their team, you know what they decide to do? They're like, you know what? Zeke. Yeah, Zeke. That's the guy. That's the guy.
We had Zeke. Remember we had Zeke remember we had Zeke that time? Remember when he was pretty good? Yeah, we're going to bring him back. We're going to bring him back. I mean, every year his yards per game has gone down and he's regressed every single year, but Zeke, he's the guy. He's the guy that's going to do it. We saw him in New England last year. He rushed for 30 yards a game. That's the guy. That's our guy right there.
Yeah, that's the guy. And then, the Cowboys, so they don't do anything in the draft. Skip Bayless is already giving up, which is crazy coming from Skip Bayless. He's already saying that the Cowboys are going to miss the playoffs, which is crazy coming from someone who tries to find every single hypothesis in or reason in his head or why the Cowboys can get to the Super Bowl, even though they haven't done so since VHS tapes were the main consumption of media. And now you have Mike McCarthy, who had his Brandon Staley moment. You get blown out by them. You don't have a running back when clearly Dak Prescott is not good without play action. He's just not. And then you cut Michael Gallup, who everyone was saying was an amazing receiver whenever I said that the Cowboys didn't have a great receiving core outside of CeeDee Lamb last year. Brandon Cooks is another year older. And now it's just CeeDee Lamb who's crying on the sideline because Dak Prescott was so bad last year. So it's like, I don't know what's going on with the Cowboys, but it's nothing good.
No, and I've said this before, and you alluded to this earlier. The Cowboys aren't making the playoffs. They're not making it. I can list, here's a couple of teams that come to mind who are better than the Cowboys in the NFC at this point. We have the Rams. We have the 49ers. We have the Bears. We have the Lions. We have the Packers. We have the Eagles. That's 6 teams right off the top of my head. And then obviously there's some other teams. The Buccaneers could be in the mix as well. That's 7 teams right then and there. And I know that there's more that I'm forgetting who we might even be surprised by.
Atlanta.
Well, yeah, Atlanta as well. So all of these teams, we have 8 teams that are better than the Cowboys at this point, and I think it's going to be a sinking ship. This is very reminiscent of the Chargers after the 27-0 blown lead, where it just feels like there's something in the air. It doesn't feel right, and I have a feeling that next year when we see them, a lot of these guys are starting to turn on Mike McCarthy. Dak Prescott, he's needing to get paid. There's going to be tension in the locker room with that. CeeDee Lamb is going to want to get paid. And then they also lost a lot of players on defense. They lost Leighton Vander Esch. They lost their offensive tackle, Teron Smith. So with the Mike McCarthy shit, with Dan Quinn leaving, with the players that they've lost, with them doing literally nothing in free agency, with them doing literally nothing in the draft, I think it's one of those takes that we're going to start to see in about 3 or 4 months, like most of these takes that we have so early.
It's going to be a sinking ship, but we knew it was going to be a sinking ship as soon as they brought back Mike McCarthy, and then the favorite head coach the favorite, not head coach, but the favorite coach on the staff left to go to the Commanders. And like Micah Parsons, like the reason why Dan Quinn stayed for so long was because of Micah Parsons' bond with Dan Quinn. And Dan Quinn's like, okay, I have a chance to really coach up this defense. And then they were a really good defense at times last year, and they have been dominant. But this is just a team. Now you have injury issues with Trayvon Diggs. And now we're like, well, how good can this team be if you need to pay Dak Prescott, CeeDee Lamb, and Micah Parsons, who have all proven that they will disappear when you need them the most? Least of those would be CeeDee Lamb. I feel like he's the one who shows up and shows out the most, but Dak Prescott doesn't show up in big games. And Micah Parsons has one sack in 4 playoff games.
Yeah, and I don't think that any of that's going to fix them, especially when they're already in cap hell. You have to sign 3 of these guys. I think the Cowboys are in for a hard rebuild, and I don't think that their answers are going to be solved anytime soon.
No, I don't think they'll be solved anytime soon, which I don't know. I wish the Cowboys were good, but again, until Dak Prescott isn't on the team, you're not going to be good because you can't play a mediocre quarterback top dollar and expect to win. And that's just the reality of the NFL. And Dak Prescott is like the bottom echelon of those guys getting top tier money. And this is always going to be the case while he's on the team. And it's just a tough truth for the Cowboys fans. But, you know, they'll be delusional next year. And honestly, I respect it. Good for you guys.
Good for you guys. I'm sure the crack is great in Dallas.
Yeah, I'm sure the crack is great. I mean, we saw the homeless people there. They seem like they were having a good time scheming in the kind of park there in the city.
Yeah, so clearly it's doing something.
Yeah. NBA playoffs. Clearly doing something. This is one of my favorite NBA playoffs in the last few years. It's been physical and the refs are swallowing the whistle, and honestly, I love it. Like, we're getting some really low scoring games where we have multiple games that are in the 90s. Sometimes teams are scoring in the 80s, and probably our favorite series coming into this was New York versus Philadelphia. And honestly, we saw Julius Randle get hurt, and people were like, oh no, what are the Knicks gonna do without Julius Randle? I'm like, what do you mean? They're not gonna have the worst
shooter in NBA playoff history, field goal percentage wise, look it up, in NBA history. They're not going to have literally the worst shooter in NBA playoff history on their team. Whatever shall they do? Oh, I guess they'll pass it to Jalen Brunson. I guess they'll pass it to Josh Hart. I guess they'll pass it to Dante DiVincenzo.
Dante DiVincenzo. I guess they'll pass it to OG Anunoby. And the problem with Julius Randle is that he's a grinder and Tom Thibodeau loves him. And that comes with its flaws, but like in this series, I want to harp on the Knicks because like everyone talks about Embiid, and it's like we'll get to him at some point. But the Knicks this year remind me so much of what that Celtics team was with Isaiah Thomas, where you just had a bunch of dudes who could get after it on defense, hit big shots. Like we had Kelly Olynyk go for 16 points in a fourth quarter to knock out the Washington Wizards. Shaquille O'Neal was calling him old knockout. Like you had just these role players come out of nowhere and have these massive games. And it's so fun to watch because you have Tom Thibodeau, who's voted at 3 times now as the coach that players would want to play for the least. And that's just because he pushes his guys, play a lot of minutes. But what the Knicks did with that was, okay, let's go out there and get one of the youngest teams in the league so they can actually handle it. And then game one, the Knicks come back. Game two, we have the Dante DiVincenzo game where they're down 5 points with about 30 seconds remaining. And the Philadelphia 76ers find a way to lose that game. But the Knicks, dare I say, find a way to win that game. And you have players like Hartenstein stepping up. You have players like DiVincenzo stepping up. You have players like Jalen Brunson just making a name for himself. He took 34 shots, but the other night getting 47 points and 10 assists, basically being responsible for 7 of their 98 points.
Yeah,
is
70.
absolutely sensational.
Yeah, and Jalen Brunson's just one of those guys that kind of, I don't want to compare him directly to Jimmy Butler, but one of those guys that in the playoffs just takes another leap above and becomes one of the best playoff performers in the league. And honestly, with that Knicks team, you mentioned how gritty and grindy they are. I think that Jalen Brunson's the heart of that. And with that team around him, I think that their ceiling, as I mentioned, is Eastern Conference Finals. I think they're going to end up facing the Celtics.
Yeah, I think they will because I do think that defensively, they can definitely slow down the Pacers. And I think offensively, they just seem like they have an easier time getting a bucket than the Pacers do. At this point, you can argue like duo of Siakam or Halliburton is better, but like honestly, I think that would be a 7-game series, but I think the Knicks would inevitably take it home. And it was funny because people are like, oh, well, the Knicks shouldn't have wanted to get the 2 seed because then they have to play the 76ers. And I'm like, why? I've seen Joel Embiid lose to Trae Young before in 6 games. Like, why wouldn't you want to play the Philadelphia 76ers, who are worse than they were last year? I mean, you brought in Buddy Hield, who was supposed to be a difference maker. Are you fucking kidding me? Every time Buddy Hield touches the ball, he looks shell-shocked, terrified, immediately wants to get rid of it. Oh, why? You don't want to go up against Tobias Harris, one of the most overrated players, the most overpaid player in NBA history who's never made an All-Star game. Tobias Harris. The guy you chose over Jimmy Butler. Tobias Harris. That guy, the guy who I have never seen make an impact in a playoff game, Tobias Harris. The guy who in every single elimination game doesn't show up, Tobias Harris. That guy, okay. Joel Embid, the guy who, okay, you lose game 2, you're going back to Philadelphia down 2-0, and he's like, oh yeah, I blame the refs for blowing a 5-point lead with 30 seconds left. Like, dude, you're 7 feet tall, and I get it. If you're playing in a game and you're injured, I respect it, but you're also playing in a game, so you put yourself out there for criticism, and then you're just sitting down with your head down, not even looking at the media, and then you come back, win in game 3, credit to you, and then in game 4, you lose and you blame the fans? Really? You're like, oh, why were Knicks fans here? I'm like, New York's not that far away. And I don't know, you're 30 years old, you're injured every single year, and it's the same exact story for the Philadelphia fans every year where, oh, if only Joel Embiid was healthy, how good we could be every year. I'm a media member and I'm an NPC and agree with every other media member, and I'm picking the Sixers to go to the finals this year because, wow, if Joel Embiid is healthy, well, every single year, he's not healthy. And at some point, when you're 30-year-old big man who's over 250 pounds, you're not going to get healthier as your career goes on. And he's 30 years old. He's not going to get it done.
No, he's not going to get it done, especially when he has the worst fourth quarter field percentage in the entire playoffs at this point. He's not clutch in the fourth quarter. I know he had that big game in game 3 where he had the 50-point bomb, but other than that, his playoff success is extremely lacking. I mean, you had a time where you had Ben Simmons in his prime, and you had Jimmy Butler in his prime, and you had Tobias Harris, and you guys did nothing.
JJ Redick too.
Yeah, you had JJ Redick as well. And the ceiling for them is winning a playoff series. And you've had some of the best rosters in the NBA at certain points. And they've definitely underperformed. And there's one, and it's not Doc Rivers, and it's not Nick Nurse, and it's not all of these players that I mentioned before. There is one person who is consistent in all of this, and it's Joel Embiid. At some point, you got to take some recognition for yourself. You have to be the proper leader to lead your team to this point and have the team on your back. When you don't show up in the fourth quarter, you don't show up in every single game, and you're constantly blaming refs and fans and everybody except for your team, you're not going to end up getting over the hump. And now at this point, as I see a guy who has had nothing but first-round exits and second-round exits, at this point, him and Kevin Durant should join forces at this point because they'd be a perfect fit for each other. They're both crybabies who lose in the first round and demand to have help around them and is never happy with what they have.
Yeah.
So at this point, I mean, the problem in Philadelphia, they're never going to get over the hump, and they're never going to make it out of the second round with Joel Embiid, no matter who they have around them.
Yeah, next time you're like whine your way to winning MVP again, it's like, well, there's a reason, like, when we have this image of you in the playoffs of being a constant choker, it's like, at least James Harden in Houston was making the conference finals every year. Like, people give James Harden so much shit, but don't keep that same energy with Joel Embiid. Like, yeah, he's hurt. Like, yes, he's hurt. When has he never been hurt in the playoffs? Like, this is the point. You got tired versus the Atlanta Hawks. Trae Young, Clint Capella, Kevin Huerter. Like, the Hawks. You lost to the Hawks not in 7, in 6 because you get tired. I don't even care if Ben Simmons was on your team. You should beat the Hawks on one leg. That was mind-boggling that year. And then the Bucks made the Hawks look like light work in the conference championship. You haven't ever beat the Milwaukee Bucks. You've never beaten the Boston Celtics. You're up 3-2 on them last year. Was that the ref's fault? Was that the fans' fault? Or was that James Harden's fault for winning a game when you weren't on the court? Like, why is last year James Harden's fault? He showed up and showed out and gave them a 3-2 lead, which is all you can ask from your second best player. But Maxey didn't show up in that game. Embiid didn't show up in your game, and now we're resorting to when you're on the ground, you're grabbing people trying to jump in the air and you're grabbing their legs. Like, first of all, if that was Draymond, would have been out of there immediately and suspended for a game. Russell Westbrook gets suspended for throwing a fake punch at a player, but Joel Embiid can grab someone's legs at this point. It's like, this guy does not get the media treatment that he deserves, because it's like, yeah, oh, they're always like, yeah, I respect Embiid for going out there hurt and putting it on the line. It's like, okay, but that's also been the consistent through line of his career, where he's always hurt, playing through something and not able to get you over the hump, which is why he'll never be Giannis. He'll never be Jokic. He'll never be Steph. He'll never be Kawhi. And that's why I always say in the playoffs, I would rather have Jason Tatum. Because I've seen Jason Tatum sweep him, come back from 3-2 on him, have a incredible game 6, and then I've seen Jason Tatum drop 46 in Milwaukee, down 3-2, and then come back and the Celtics wipe him out at home.
Yeah, I've seen way more moxie with Jason Tatum, and let's also not forget what happened last year. You mentioned that they were up 3-2, but there's more to that, because I remember very clearly in Game 7, winner takes all. Play next, goes on to the next round. You want to know how many points Joel Embiid had in that game? 14 points. He had 14 points in that game, and it was a complete disaster. And this isn't just a one-time thing. He's done this in the playoffs consistently. When it matters most, he shrinks. There are two types of players in the NBA. You either show up in the big moment or you don't. And Joel Embiid, he's a great regular season player. And you want to compare him to James Harden? Sure. Right, James Harden regular season, great. But James Harden in the postseason has had those games, those great performances. He's made it to a Western Conference Finals. and was up 3-2 against the Warriors at
Until
one point.
CP3 got hurt.
Until CP3 got hurt, and they missed 30 straight threes in a row. But they're up 3-2 against the Dynasty.
With
So
KD.
So James Harden, give him some shit all you want. You want to say he's a partier, you want to say this and that about him, you want to say he's flaky, sure. But he is not Joel Embiid. Joel Embiid has choked in the playoffs. Joel Embiid blames other people for the problems. Honestly, you want to join a super team, have him, Doc Rivers, and Kevin Durant on the same team, and they'd be the most toxic organization in all of basketball.
Yeah.
Honest to
They're on
God.
Kawhi. They're on Kawhi.
Sure.
At least Kawhi's won a championship on his own. But yeah, the Sixers, like, I've just seen it so many times with the media. It's like, oh, if Joel Embiid was healthy, like, okay, he's never healthy. He's 30. He is one Kardashian away from his career being over.
Yep.
That's where we're at with Embiid. It's like, I can't see him being dominant past 33. Like, I really think he only has 3 more good seasons left to go. And I think it's going to be a similar trajectory with Zion. But, like, that's what I have to say with the Sixers. Needed to get that off my chest. But we do have some other series to go over here real quick. So probably one of the weirdest series. We can brush by this one. The Magic in Cleveland, 2-2 right now, kind of exchanging home blowouts. But Paulo Banchero, I think, is the real deal. He's one of the youngest players in the league. He's the youngest player in Magic history to lead the team in scoring, assists, and rebounds, and he showed out at home. The Wagner brothers played really well for this team. We're seeing players like Markelle Fultz come in. They're really shutting down the Cavs. And my problem with the Cavs was always this: Evan Mobley and Jarrett Allen should not be on the same team, let alone the same floor. I get Evan Mobley can shoot a little bit here, but you have 2 players who kind of get compromised in the playoffs. You have your size as an advantage, but it would be great if it was the 80s and we weren't shooting threes and spacing the floor. But, like, these are just 2 guys where you're always going to have a problem scoring at some point, and then Darius Garland kind of disappears, and then Donovan Mitchell at this point, I don't think he'll be able to take a team to the conference finals being the solo star. And honestly, I don't think this Cleveland Cavaliers team is as good as those Utah Jazz teams.
With Donovan Mitchell, you mean?
Yeah, I think Donovan Mitchell and Rudy Gobert having like Bogdanovich, having Mike Conley Jr. when they had Joe Ingles there. I think those teams with Quinn Snyder were better than this current Cleveland Cavaliers team. It's like this is kind of the sacrificial lamb for the Celtics at this point, but I would rather see a young, hungry Orlando Magic team that hasn't done anything since Dwight Howard was there win at this point than Cleveland. And typically with these series, when you see a young team with the Magic, they look like they were over their skis in game 1 and game 2. And then you look up in game 3 and you're like, wait a minute, it's 104-66. What happened? And then you win 2 in a row. I saw this with Luka when they were playing the Suns, where the Suns go up 2-0. Luka wins the next 2. Cleveland goes back, and then Luka wins the next 2 after that. So I think all the pressure right now is on Cleveland. So I could see Orlando pulling off the upset here.
Yeah, I think they will. Cleveland has so much more pressure on them as well. If you think about it, like, they traded all these picks for Donovan Mitchell. They've had Evan Mobley. He's been decent for them in the regular season, but I think in the playoffs, he's definitely compromised. Darius Garland, he's one of those players that he's either going to shoot the lights out and he's going to drop 30 points, or he's going to drop 10 points and shoot 25% from the field. So you just don't know which Darius Garland you get any given night. And then also for the Magic, like, what do they need to do? They're living with house money.
Yeah.
I mean, this really isn't even their year yet. Like, Paulo Banchero, I think he's 2 years into the league at this point.
Yeah.
And then you have all these guys around him who are also playing with house money. Markelle Fultz, a guy who will never live up to Jason Tatum and all these guys. So he's kind of just playing with house money as well. So I think this Magic team, they're figuring out how to win, and they're figuring it out in the playoffs right now. So it doesn't really matter who wins this series, but I do have my money on the Magic as well because there's a lot less pressure on them. They don't have draft capital that's gone for Donovan Mitchell. They don't have any of these guys. They're all playing on rookie contracts, and they all have these role players who are just kind of playing with house money.
Yeah.
So no pressure on the Magic, all the pressure on the Cavs. If this fails for the Cavs, it's way more of a failure for them than the Magic. So I think the Magic are going to prevail ultimately.
Yeah, definitely. And then it's also like with the Magic, we're seeing the law of averages play out right now because it's like how many draft picks can you actually miss? And now they finally hit one.
Yeah, and he's been electric for him. And I think also, like, you want to talk about what the NBA probably wants. Like, do we really care to see the Cavs against the Celtics get swept? Or would we rather see the Magic steal a game next round against the Celtics? Like,
Yeah.
what's more exciting, seeing a young or rising star or seeing the Cavs?
Yeah, and I think Paulo right now is better than Donovan Mitchell. Donovan Mitchell at this point in his career is a little bit better, has a little bit more experience there, but I think as time goes on, I think Paulo is going to be a force, and we could potentially see Orlando become a destination for some of these stars. There's some talk of like maybe Paul George going to Orlando. If they do well, maybe Kevin Durant goes there. Maybe that's his next chapter of his career. But overall, they're trading blowouts. It's been some entertaining basketball, so I am not too disappointed with the series. Hopefully it goes 7. But then we get to the Pacers in Milwaukee. Game 1, Dame reminds us like, hey, I'm still Dame Lillard. Drops 35 points in the first half, playing absolutely ridiculous. And then Indiana, we're like, oh, is Indiana too young? They look a little bit shell-shocked here. And then the second half, Dame doesn't score any points. Indiana Pacers build some momentum there. And then the next game, Rick Carlisle, credit to him, famous Mavericks head coach, figures it out. And then we see players like Obi Toppin step up. Yeah, that's right, Obi Toppin. We see Pascal Siakam step up. We're seeing Tyrese Halliburton start to find his way. And then you have some of the great young players off your bench. Or like TJ McConnell, what? And then you have Miles Turner hit a career high in 3-pointers in the death nail without Damian Lillard in game 4 there to give the Indiana Pacers a 3-1 lead, looking like they're going on, which was our prediction was Pacers Knicks for the second round there. But Milwaukee is what we thought they would be, which is Giannis, injury-riddled star. We're like, let's not ignore that Giannis just had a calf injury, which could potentially lead to an Achilles, where they're probably going to have to be careful with him. And then Dame didn't want to be there, said he's bored. He's like, this is the worst place to go through a breakup in. Actual quote from him, I miss my family. So he's probably not there anymore. He gets injured. And then Chris Middleton gets hobbled in the last game, and he's playing on one leg right now. And my problem with the Bucks was I thought Chris Middleton was past his prime where he could really be a star contributor to a top team, because once you start having hamstring injuries in your late 30s, probably not going to get better. And then Dame is not going to want to stay there in Milwaukee. And oh yeah, Doc Rivers is your head coach. And then my biggest problem with the Milwaukee Bucks is when people say the name Brook Lopez and Bobby Portis, because I've seen them so many times. How many times have we watched the Bucks and Celtics play where it's an elimination game? Brook Lopez disappears, Bobby Portis just disappears, and they don't get anything from them. It's like the Bucks series last year versus the Miami Heat. Where was Bobby Portis? Because you were playing an inferior Heat roster and they destroyed you. Where was Brook Lopez in that series? And people keep saying those names like it's a good thing. Like, of course, when no pressure is on them now, they're going to hit shots, but Bobby Portis and Brook Lopez disappear in big moments when Giannis isn't there, when Dame isn't going off. It's like you need Giannis, Dame, and Middleton to have a shot at going to the finals, and it's not even a lock to get there, but you can't rely on Bobby Portis because I've seen him and Brook Lopez disappear time after time after time in the playoffs.
Yeah, I think that these are one of these players that you hear the name often. You hear Brook Lopez. You remember Brook Lopez because you're a fan of basketball and you've watched basketball for a long time, and you remember him on the Nets, and you have good memories with Brook Lopez. He was good to you back in the day. But now, Brook Lopez is what? 74? Is that how old Brook Lopez is? And Bobby Portis? Bobby Portis has been playing since I've been shitting in diapers, for Christ's sakes. So these guys, like, yes, we know their names. We remember them fondly. They had great memories with our early adolescence. But at this point, they're old. And Chris Middleton, another guy who's old. And Giannis. Giannis is great. Damian Lillard is great. But at this point, with Dame being unhappy and never wanting to be in Milwaukee, with Brooke Lopez being 94 and Bobby Portis being 87, it's like at this point, this team is old. This was the concerns going into the season with the Bucks. They're old. They probably should have traded Chris Middleton rather than Drew Holiday. We've seen how much Drew Holiday has helped them. So you see an aging team. And then on top of all of this, you have Doc Rivers, who everywhere he goes, he implodes that team, whether it was the Magic in the early 2000s or the Big Three in Boston or the Clippers. And now we're seeing it with the Bucks. So this team, we called it. We said the Pacers are going to win this series. It felt obvious to us, but for other people, maybe not so much. So this is just a culmination of a lot of mistakes made by the Bucks the last 2 or 3 years, and it's going to result in them losing in 5.
Yeah, it's going to result in them losing in 5. And once they're officially eliminated, we don't have time to go through right now what they can do next season because of the draft, but we'll definitely do a deep dive on these teams getting eliminated with what they need to do to be competitive next year. And then last series in the East, we had Boston, Miami. Miami got a game. It just kind of felt like Boston was lethargic. Everyone wants to freak out about the Celtics in that game. And I was like, the Celtics are the one team where everyone, when the Celtics are playing well, they're like, yep, championship team. Be shocked if they didn't win the finals. And then they lose a game. They're like, see, told you I can't trust the Celtics. I'm like, okay, which one is it? Because I feel like no one really has a strong opinion of the Celtics right now. I feel like some people are like, yeah, they should win the finals. But as soon as they have like one game where they're kind of lethargic, where it was a 6-game series with the Hawks last year, but they still went up against the Miami Heat, ended up getting bounced, but they have Porzingis. They have Drew Holiday. Sam Hauser and Peyton Pritchard have been the most impressive players in my eyes, where game 1, they were just hitting wide open shots. And for me, it's like Boston's going to be in the finals. I don't really see anybody beating them. There's just not enough offense in New York or Indiana to compete with the Celtics. And then also, the thing I noticed, because I went to game 1 for the Celtics, and it was Jason Tatum's first career triple-double. And I noticed that because I was like, I've never seen Tatum pass this well ever. And Jason Tatum seems like the game is slowing down for him a little bit, but he's actually looking for players now when he's getting doubled, not forcing the ball through the double team. Jaylen Brown still can't pass, but now that Jason Tatum is kind of seeing the floor now, he's passing it. The shooting that Porzingis adds, I think that's the next level he needed to go to for them to win the finals. Because I think defensively, I mean, it's the best defensive lineup in basketball outside of Porzingis, who's probably the worst, but you can make up for it if you need to stop and put in Al Horford. But overall, it's just the best team in the East. Don't really get why people jump on and off the bandwagon, because like it's obvious. Like they lost one game to Miami, but Miami also hit the most threes they hit all season in that game. It's pretty hard to beat a team when they hit 25 threes.
Yeah, a team gets hot, and like ultimately, had the Celtics blown another game to Miami, then I would have worried. But I mean, like, yes, that was a bad game. There's no Jimmy Butler, and that roster is not that great on paper. But at the end of the day, like we see games like this all the time, and this is going to be a long series. So I think the Celtics wrap it up. They win in 5, and then they move on to most likely either the Magic or Cavs. I think the Magic end up winning. They'll take care of them most likely in 4, and then they'll be on to the Knicks or Pacers. So they have a pretty easy line to the finals. And then at that point, it's, are they going to face the Thunder? Are they going to face the Nuggets? Are they going to face another team that comes out of the West?
Yeah, and speaking of another team that may come out of the West, we had the Timberwolves wrap it up in 4 with the Phoenix Suns. And with Phoenix, where you're like, it's redundant. We didn't really buy into Phoenix all year long because Devin Booker, crazy stat, has never won a playoff game without Chris Paul.
Really?
Never.
That's crazy.
That's very strange for a guy who was supposed to be the next Kobe. I mean, we ended that conversation right away in this game because Anthony Edwards took over the chat and he's like, Kobe, Devin Booker, no, I got this. And then Stephen A was like, yeah, he's the next Kobe Bryant, he's the next Michael Jordan. And then he was talking about how him and Michael Wilbon were calling Michael Jordan like, yeah, this kid is great. He reminds us a lot of you. And Michael Jordan comes out with the statement. He's like, I had a lot of flings in 2001, and I definitely have some kids I don't know about, and some of them are in the NBA. And then you're like, 2001, do the math. Anthony Edwards is 22. And then we're like, did Michael Jordan just confirm that Anthony Edwards is his son?
Honestly, that is one of the coolest lines anybody has ever said in NBA history.
Yeah.
And that is why he's the GOAT, because Michael Jordan he just drips cool. I mean, that talk about a fucking amazing line. Like, that is so cool. The fact that you have Anthony Edwards who's dunking over everybody on the Suns and is going absolutely parabolic. And Michael Jordan says, I had a lot of fling. He basically just said, I fucked a lot of bitches in 2001, and there's a chance that one of them was Anthony Edwards' mother.
Yeah.
Like, so cool. Just
Yeah.
that line alone.
Jimmy Butler,
who is his son. I don't care if they need to do a DNA test. He is his son. But I need to apologize, because I've been very harsh to the Minnesota Timberwolves for a very long time. And a lot of this was because it was really aimed at Rudy Gobert. Like, it really was.
the
Like,
whole trade too.
I mean, that trade is still terrible. I'm not
Yeah.
going to apologize for hating on that trade, because that trade was pretty terrible, and it still is. 5 first-round picks for Rudy Gobert. I don't care. However, there is a man I need to apologize, and his name is Anthony Edwards. I always thought that Anthony Edwards was very good, but my friend, I did not know your game was that good. My God. I mean, this guy, by the end of the playoffs, by the time they're over, we could be looking at a guy who could be arguing for top 5. Potentially. He's got top 5 potential, 100%.
Mm.
And I think ultimately he'll probably be in the top 10 when the conversation is over this playoff run. But you want to talk about a guy who takes over a game? It's Anthony Edwards. This dude is a freak. Now, when they win this series, do they face the winner of the Thunder or the Nuggets series?
They're gonna play the Nuggets.
They're going to play the Nuggets. Okay. I don't think they're going to beat the Nuggets, but I think that they're going to put up a fight for
Yeah.
sure.
I think they'll put up a fight because any competent center can embarrass Rudy Gobert. And Rudy Gobert is the best defender in the regular season, but I've always said Rudy Gobert is useless in the playoffs, and that is a detriment to the Suns, because now people are like, oh, Rudy Gobert is pretty good. Look at him play in the playoffs. I'm like, no, and stop it right now, because you have the perfect team with the Minnesota Timberwolves. You have Mike Conley, Anthony Edwards, and Jaden McDaniels, who's been a rock star for them. He's been their number 3 on offense for them, and they've been able to funnel the ball to Rudy Gobert. And then Yusuf Nurkic is their center. It's like, no shade to Nurkic, but he hasn't been able to compete with Gobert the same way where Jokic, whenever he plays him, just dominates this guy. And then Karl Anthony Towns has showed up and showed out. He's the perfect number 2, and now he's finally accepting that role as the second best player on the team. But the Suns are the one that made this Rudy Gobert conversation possible, because up until now, he has been incompetent in the playoffs. He's been someone who hasn't been able to guard players on the perimeter with the Utah Jazz. Every time you thought about him, you'd think about the play where Steph Curry's turning him in and out. And this has been his best run in the playoffs. So I think this is a team that fits together perfectly, where you have Gobert, Karl Anthony Towns is hitting threes now, Mike Conley Jr. is turning back the clock, but you have Anthony Edwards versus the Denver Nuggets, and it's like, okay, Jamal Murray can cancel him out on a given night, and then who is canceling out Jokic? Who is canceling out Aaron Gordon on the boards? Because let me tell you this, Aaron Gordon's defense in this playoffs has been tremendous. He's been one of the best players as far as accumulating bonus points that don't show up in the box score in that Lakers series. He was the one shutting down Anthony Davis. What do you think he's going to do to Rudy Gobert and Karl Anthony Towns? I think this was a really good round for them, but they probably got the easiest matchup outside of the Pelicans. And honestly, the Pelicans may have put up more of a fight.
No, I'm actually going to give credit to the Pelicans. The Pelicans are a much harder fight. The Suns are what you build in 2K. You get Kevin Durant, you get Devin Booker, and you get Bradley Beal, and then you sign a bunch of mid-level exceptions. You literally do this in 2K when you have the salary cap on. And that's why you have players like Bol, and that's why you have players like Nurkic and all these other guys. The Suns were never good. You saw it this season. Like, yes, they can score a lot of points, but they couldn't play defense. You have three players who have similar play styles. Kevin Durant is getting older, and he has also not won a second round, anything past the second round since he left the Warriors. I wonder who won that Baroque Cup at this point. And again, he's unhappy. So there's that as well. And the Suns, like, who really believed in the Suns at this point? Like, they got Bradley Beal.
Colin Cowherd.
Well, Colin Cowherd's an idiot, but Bradley Beal, it didn't make sense when they traded for him and they gave up all this capital for him. I think it would have worked a lot better if it was Kevin Durant and Devin Booker as a pairing rather than forming a super team. But this team is a culmination of the end of an era for a number of reasons, right? The super team era. First, it was LeBron. Well, I guess you can point to the Celtics, right? They had the big three, and they were slightly successful. They won their title. LeBron with the Heat, they won 2 titles. And then ultimately, the Warriors, they had Kevin Durant. They formed as well. But now, this is the culmination of a failed machine coming to a brutal, brutal end with the massive, what will soon be a massive failure of a big three. You saw the Nets big three disaster, which is probably the worst big three ever formed. And now we're going to see this crumble to the bits as Kevin Durant is now unhappy with the coaching styles. We have Bradley Beal, who is often hurt and kind of overrated. And then Devin Booker. This is going to crumble quickly.
You know the funniest part about Bradley Beal on the Suns is
What?
that he has a no trade clause.
A no trade clause?
Yeah, so you can't even get rid of him. So unless the Lakers are like, yeah, we'll give you Rui Hachimura and
Look at Austin Reeves.
Austin Reeves, who we'll get to him later, but like if we'll give you like Rui Hachimura, some Gabe Vincent and Spencer Dinwiddie for Bradley Beal, and Bradley Beal's like, okay, I'll go to the Lakers. Like, then you potentially could make a trade there, but now it's like you're in a position where you might have to trade Devin Booker, and now you have Kevin Durant, who also signed another contract, and he's still under contract for 3 years, I believe, with the Phoenix Suns there. So now the Suns are just kind of a complicated team to rebuild now, where most people are saying that you need to trade Devin Booker. They're like, Devin Booker's been there 9 years, hasn't won a playoff game without Chris Paul. So we could potentially see Devin Booker maybe go somewhere like the Knicks or the Magic. Maybe you swap, if you could trade Devin Booker for like Donovan Mitchell, throw in some draft capital, and then maybe get someone like their second big man there back.
Evan Mobley?
Evan Mobley. Maybe get like an Evan Mobley figure back. But yeah, Suns are in a tough position right now, but I can't say I feel sorry for them.
I don't feel bad because when people do stupid things, they're going to have consequences for it. And I think that they made a dumb decision going after Bradley Beal. I think Bradley Beal would have fit pretty much any other team better. And so they are there to live with their mistakes. And now they don't have a first round pick until Kevin Durant is 42 years old. Bradley Beal will be 36 by that time that happens. And Devin Booker will be 34. So they're not going to have a first round pick until we are into our 30s at this point. So, yeah. So at that point, it's like you made your own mistakes. You buried your own grave, and now you're just lighting it with gasoline.
Yeah, new owner syndrome.
Yeah, new owner syndrome, and it's going to be a massive failure when you can't even win a playoff game against the Timberwolves, who I'll go back on my case here. The Timberwolves are the worst playoff performers in NBA history outside of this playoff series.
Yeah.
This is the first time that they have won a playoff series in 20 years. But yes, here you are now. You face the Suns, who are pathetic, and now they are a crumbling castle.
Yeah, now they're a crumbling castle, and good luck to them because they're going up against the Nuggets, who right now are going to be playing the Lakers tonight, potentially eliminating them in Denver. And Jokic was kind of like, when you play a team so many times, you get bored of the play style. And clearly the Nuggets have not taken the Lakers seriously. They're like, we'll even spot you 20 points, and then Jamal Murray will rip your heart out. But for me, we know the Nuggets were going to win the series, but the funniest part was the people before the series that are like, No, the Lakers have a shot, man. Like the Lakers have a shot to win this, and I'm like, okay. Who is their three? D'Angelo Russell. Okay. First problem: D'Angelo Russell playing better than he did in last series. Potentially, that's an argument, but D'Angelo Russell should not be a starter on any team with championship aspirations. Austin Reeves taking the next step forward. Sorry, your third best player cannot be Austin Reeves. That's just something that can't happen. And then Rui Hachimura, he's a guy who's out there on the court and he hits shots sometimes, but sometimes he goes ice cold. Anthony Davis and LeBron have been great in this series. Overall, Anthony Davis has been maybe the best player in this series. Him and Jokic have been going back and forth right after it, but it's like at a point when you have an old LeBron, you have Anthony Davis who came out and said, "We don't know what we're doing on offense and defense sometimes." Like, what? And
That's
then
not good.
after he says that, the Lakers are like, by the way, Darvin Ham's job is secure. Basically firing right back at him because we all know LeBron Clutch Sports is the one who will leak things about a coach and try and get them removed when LeBron wants to make a power play there. So it's like now the Lakers are in a weird spot where you have an aging LeBron who now just wants to play with Bronny next season somewhere. And this is the first time I've ever seen LeBron look old. Like last playoffs, he looked old and he got a little bit exhausted in that sweep there. But this is the first series where I've seen LeBron like, wow, the guy actually kind of looks old a little bit. I know he's still making plays. He's still better than most players, but it's the first time he doesn't necessarily look like the LeBron James I know and remember. And then we have Anthony Davis saying things where AD actually may not be happy in LA. It's like the Lakers maybe time to trade LeBron and AD, completely start over with this team.
Well, I think at this point, what's their ceiling? I mean, obviously they ran into the Nuggets, and that was the worst team they could have possibly faced. But at the same time, like I don't think they would have made much noise against the Thunder either. So it's like you have AD who is great when he's consistent, but that's kind of his downfall, and he also has injury issues. And then you have LeBron who's in year 21 or 22 at this point, still playing great up to that level of being that 20-year, 22-year veteran, but like he's going to be 40 years old next year. And then your next player after that is Austin Reeves, who I like Austin Reeves a lot. I really do. But let's be realistic here. Where would he be a three anywhere else? Like he's a starter somewhere, but is he ever going to be somebody who's going to be on that championship roster? And I don't know if that's ever going to be the case. So at this point, like if LeBron's leaving, you might as well trade Anthony Davis as well and just start the full rebuild again where you can actually build the team from the bottom up because right now it's just your ceiling is second round at this point,
Yeah.
and they're not going to make it past the first. They're going to lose tonight, and we're going to talk about this. And there's no way that they win tonight. I'm sorry.
Yeah, there's no way where they win the series. So it's like, what are you actually doing? Because the Lakers, the real problem with it is they got everyone they wanted in free agency and more. It's like, oh, we got Gabe Vincent. We signed Spencer Dinwiddie here, brought in some extra help. But the real reason why they won the championship, albeit in the bubble, was Rajon Rondo and Dwight Howard, where you
Mm.
had those two veterans where Rondo was an excellent point guard and then AD was playing four most of the time. And then Dwight Howard had one of the best seasons he had of his later career, where he was actually a dominant force and he was someone who made Bam and AD in that series look pretty small. And they couldn't keep Dwight Howard and AD off of the boards. Where you look at the Nuggets and you're like, Jokic is the center, but Aaron Gordon plays with the most force out of anyone in that series. And the crazy thing was when AD was going ballistic, he was going ballistic in game 2 on Jokic, and when they were down 20, they put Aaron Gordon on AD, and after that, he had one shot attempt, and he didn't score on Aaron Gordon at all in that game. And then Aaron
Mm.
Gordon has had these games where he got 29 points and 15 rebounds. Can I
That's
interest you in that? And then he's been defending LeBron, defending Anthony Davis, and then Michael Porter Jr. is so young at this point where he's still getting better. He had a knee injury in college. He's going through a lot right now. He's going through a lot of personal situations that we don't need to get into, but he's someone whenever they need a three, whenever they need a bucket to keep them in the game, he was the one that hit that big shot in game 2 to keep them in it. He's been hitting big threes to keep them consistent. And then you have Jokic and Jamal Murray. It's like you have two pretty good duos on your team where you can put Aaron Gordon and Jamal Murray out there, then Michael Porter and Jokic out there, and then you have KCP as well. It's like the perfect team, but like Aaron Gordon, I must say, is at this point one of the most underrated players in basketball. He's like does all the little things. He's playing defense, getting blocks, he can hit threes, and then oh yeah, he'll have a couple games where he gives you 30.
Yeah, honestly, at this point, every championship team has a player like Aaron Gordon, whether it's the Warriors with Draymond Green or back in the Spurs dynasty, they had like the Robert Ory's of the world where they were just kind of the glue guys, and Aaron Gordon is that glue guy for the Nuggets. Obviously, Joker, he's the main star, Jamal Murray, the sidekick, but at this point, like with Aaron Gordon and what he brings to that team defensively, what he brings as a role player is something that not many players have and not many teams have, period, in basketball. And I think he's super valuable, and it's good to see him here, especially when we saw what he was in Orlando and how much he's evolved to what he is now in Denver. He's completely changed his game around. He really fits the mold and the culture of Denver extremely well. So I really like what he's done there, and I think he should be properly compensated for it.
Yeah, definitely. He has like I was thinking about the other day. I was like, who's better at this point? Like I was like, because I think Aaron Gordon has the chance to have a better career than Blake Griffin did.
He already does.
Yeah, just the way he reinvented himself, the impact he's making, where you could definitely say he's the third guy, but maybe the most important guy on a championship team where he's their Draymond Green to the Warriors.
Yeah, exactly. He complements that team too well.
Yeah, and then we have another young team, Oklahoma City Thunder. They're going to sweep the Pelicans now. Had a tough game in game 1, pretty competitive back and forth, but Chet, SGA, both Jalen Williams, Lou Dort, even Josh Giddey was getting it a little bit on in game 3. And after game 3, when they went up 3-0 and teams are 151 and 0 with a 3-0 lead, Josh Giddey was asked, like, how do you feel about being the youngest team in NBA history as the 1 seed and you're up 3-0 now? And Josh Giddey's response was, my only regret is that we're not younger.
Yeah. Yeah, he did say that, didn't he?
He did.
Yeah, no, I mean, this was expected. They should blow back the Pelicans, but they're a really fun team to watch. I really like watching them play. Chet Holmgren, I mean, he had that major injury to start his career, and he's really come onto his own this year. SGA, somebody that the Clippers could have had on their roster. They could definitely use him in that Maverick series. He's really ascended extremely well. So I really like this team. They're a lot of fun to watch. I think that they can compete with the Nuggets. I think we'll end up matching up with them in the Western Conference Finals, and that's going to be a great series. But they play defense, they shoot a bunch of threes, and they have a good overall offensive mindset. So I think the Thunder, they're a lot of fun to watch, and I'm excited to see how they evolve in the playoffs.
Yeah, and it's good because they're a young team that has a pecking order. They know it's going to be SGA number 1 when we need a bucket. He's the go-to guy. Chet Holmgren's been really good defensively. He's been standing up to some players trying to dunk on him. And then you have Jalen Williams, who's your number 2, and he's been the perfect second perimeter scorer for that team where he's not giving you 30, but he's consistently giving you 20. SGA and Chet Holmgren will fill in everything else, and then everyone on that team can shoot, which is pretty much all you can ask. The worst shooter on their starting team is probably Josh Giddey, but you have Lou Dort starting there, who's been a really good 3-and-D guy hitting shots. So really excited to see what the Thunder do. Do need to see them against a more formidable opponent, which will be either the Clippers or the Mavericks. And when we saw this was going to be the matchup, we were like, oh, James Harden, Russell Westbrook, Paul George, maybe Kawhi Leonard every other game. And then we have Luka, Kyrie, Jason Kidd, Ty Lue. And this series, I must say, has not disappointed, because you were
No.
watching that game the other day, down 31, and the Mavericks are coming back. It's like, Jesus Christ, Luca.
Yeah, no kidding. And then also we saw in game 4, we saw Paul George go on an absolute parabolic tear in the second quarter. Could not miss a three. I think he made what, 5 threes in the second quarter.
Yeah.
And then third quarter comes around, Luka and Kyrie, they wake up, they come back. They actually take the lead at one point. And then we have James Harden in the fourth quarter coming in clutch, making those big buckets when it mattered. And they did end up staving off the Clippers, but nearly blew that 31-point lead. But this series, it's been exchanging blows. It's been super competitive. Some of these players playing incredible, out of their minds. I have this sort of love-hate relationship with Kyrie Irving, where when he's on, he is just amazing.
Yeah.
He is just a spectacle to watch. The layup that he made in game 4,
Yeah.
I'm like, this man is not human. Truly. I mean, if you want to talk about acrobatic finishes, I mean, he's probably the best finisher of our generation. Like him and Steph Curry, hand in hand when it comes to that. Just incredible to watch. Luka Doncic, top 5 player in the league. Like this is the perfect series for the first round, and I've loved to see them watch all the way through.
Yeah, definitely. I hope it goes 7 games. And for me, this series, like, we've learned a lot about both teams, but James Harden, we knew in Philadelphia, I was like, if we just get Sixers James Harden with the Clippers last year, that's great, because he won the Philadelphia 76ers 2 games in that series. And then you ask your number 1 star, Joel Embiid, to at least win you 2 other games, which he was not able to do. But James Harden showed up. He was hitting the floaters in this game, and I love that James Harden, as soon as Luka had 5 fouls, they started targeting him. James Harden was going to the rim, hitting those floaters every single time. My problem is not with James Harden on this Clippers team, it's with Paul George. Because if it's between Luka and Paul George in a game 7, I can't trust Paul George. I can't do it. It's like ever since that Indiana series where he went up against LeBron James twice, they went toe to toe with LeBron at the peak of his powers. And we're like, Paul George might be the next dude. I mean, this guy was absolutely incredible when you look back at what that roster was. Ever since that knee injury, though, sorry, you lost to Rudy Gobert and Donovan Mitchell with the Utah Jazz, and you just completely disappear. People want to talk about James Harden disappearing, but Paul George can equally disappear as much as James Harden. And then you remember when you see Russell Westbrook on the floor, you're like, oh, right, Russell Westbrook should not be on the floor at the end of a fourth quarter, because Russell Westbrook will take a shot when he shouldn't take it. Typically, it's been Terrence Mann, but there have been some moments in the series where the Clippers get some momentum, and then Russell Westbrook says, oh, we have momentum. Let me give it right back to the Dallas Mavericks. So I still like Dallas a little bit better now. The matchup I want to see in the conference finals right now is still Denver versus the Mavericks. I think that would be an absolute battle there, especially with how well Dallas has been playing defensively, especially Luka in that game 2, where the Clippers were 2 for 17 when trying to score on Luka Doncic, and he had 2 blocks in that game as well. So Luka playing really well. Excited to see how this series plays out. So yeah, NBA playoffs have been awesome, and they also have another league that they subsidize, which is the WNBA. And there's a contract going around with Caitlin Clark. People are like, oh my God, Caitlin Clark is only getting paid $76,000. And people are like, oh, well, the WNBA doesn't make any money. And it can go down the line of some sexism. And I'm not opposed to watching the WNBA, but I don't want to hear them complain about not getting paid as much when you don't market your product.
Yeah. And there's their opportunity right now. They got Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese. They have the narratives now. We saw what happened in college basketball this year with women's basketball. Generated, I think, 15 million for the game against LSU versus Iowa. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of buzz around the WNBA, and I think that when it comes time for her next contract, it's going to be a hell of a lot more, because people are finally tuning into the WNBA. And I think it's going to be great for sports when we see these women that are coming in, a lot of talented players. I think if they can market it like the way the NBA has been able to, and the way the NFL and all these other sports have successfully done so, then the WNBA is going to be right
Yeah.
up there with these other sports, I think.
Yeah, and women's sports, it's like it's still entertaining to watch. Like I like women's tennis, even though Serena Williams has said like the last ranked tennis player would smoke me. And like Serena Williams said that, but like it's still intense. It's still fun to watch. And for me, it's like with the WNBA, the issue I have, it's like I don't have a reason to watch it because it's never advertised and you don't push it and you don't talk about any storylines or any intrigue with the WNBA. It's not because I don't want to watch it. It's like, give me a reason to watch it, market it to me, tell me why I should be watching it. And now you're capitalizing off of Caitlin Clark. You're capitalizing on her rivalry with Angel Reese, potentially being the Magic and Bird of the WNBA. And it's like, that's all you have to do because if you're taking money away from the NBA and investing it into the WNBA, how about you're like, hey, ESPN, can you talk about the WNBA a little bit more? Because guess what? It's in the perfect time of the year. It's in summer. There's nothing on but baseball, and a lot of people are going on vacation doing outdoor activities. But if you market the WNBA, it's like, okay, there's another sport that's on, and it's a perfect opportunity because there's nothing else really going on this summer. So if you actually market it right, I think the WNBA could take off.
Oh, I think so for sure. Especially like you mentioned with some of these players that are coming in there. You've had great WNBA players before. We had the Deanna Taurasi's and Sue Birds and Maya Moores of the world, but the problem is that nobody knew who they were outside of the WNBA fan circles. So now ESPN, I really think probably since 2020, they've really kind of pushed for the WNBA and gaining some more buzz for it.
Yeah.
And guess what? It's worked because now at this point, people are more invested. People know the teams, and it's one of those leagues where you can watch it grow in real time. And I
Yeah.
think we're going to see. You give it 5 years with this WNBA, especially with the timing that it's on there. I mean, at this point, it's going to be competing with maybe like the XFL in baseball, but baseball, it's the same problem that we have with the WNBA. Baseball has had a problem with since the steroid era, where they cannot generate buzz to save their life, and they seem to hate their sport. That's a whole nother story. So the WNBA, if they're smart and they can promote it accordingly, then this is going to own the summer
Yeah.
if it does it the right way.
Yeah, and it's not necessarily like, yeah, those people are like, oh, well, I'll tune in once they can dunk. Like, honestly, dunking is cool in basketball, but the most interesting part of the NBA is what? The 3-point shot. So it's like we're seeing the evolution of the NBA. It's less about big dunks and it's more about high volume 3-point shooters. And Luca was like, Caitlin Clark is a better shooter than me. She's going to be the WNBA Steph Curry. It's like, okay, now we're actually taking advantage of marketing it. And you had all these commentators. I noticed they're tweeting out, like, oh, the women's tournament's so much better, so much more competitive than the men's tournament, which is in turn creating some buzz because you don't need a market men's college basketball for people to tune into the NBA, but you have to at least start somewhere. So now you have to play 2, 3 years in the WNBA basically to get drafted. Caitlin Clark was there for a while. So now they're like, okay, we market it from college. Now we can market it. And it's also going to be a summer sport. And now that you're generating those revenue, you're seeing someone like Caitlin Clark get a shoe deal. She has her State Farm commercial, or maybe Allstate. Maybe she's in good hands or something. But now they're getting extra advertisement money because the WNBA is starting to create stars. So it's like the salaries won't have the jump at first, but the Indiana Fever selling out their season tickets already is a pretty damn good start. And it's still a very young league, so it's not necessarily a knock on it because the NBA players weren't really getting paid that much before Larry Bird and Magic Johnson.
Yeah, it's actually had a very similar arc to it because if you think about when Larry and Magic came onto the scene, similar idea where you had people in college for 3, 4 years. College basketball was what was the pecking order at that point because the 60s Celtics, I mean, as great as they were, it was not necessarily good for the sport. And then the 70s era is literally defined as the Coke era in the NBA, literally.
Yeah.
So then they came in, and it's had a similar arc where college basketball is what brought interest to the NBA, and now we see what's going to happen here. So I think that give it about 5 years, they go to renegotiate their next TV deal, and they're going to get compensated fairly again.
Yeah, definitely. And it's like again, I'll say this one more time. you're not competing with anybody. You start when the WNBA. You start when the NBA ends. Hockey is over. There's no football during your league, so it's like you're not competing with everyone. So it's like go out there, get it done. And I think they're actually making an effort now where I felt like they were just throwing money into the WNBA, but not really knowing how to make an effort to market it. And I think the next step will definitely be celebrities showing up there. Some NBA players have been showing up for those games, but I actually think it's heading in a positive direction now. And it's like not the argument of like, oh, they can't dunk. It's like no one cares about dunks as much. It's exciting, but like let's get some more scoring at least.
Yeah, let's get some more scoring. Let's get some more headlines. And I think the WNBA is in a great spot. So
Yeah.
we're in a good place.
Yeah, we are in a good place because we recapped the NFL draft, everything you need to know about that. We recapped the NBA playoffs, everything you need to know about that and going forward from here. And we talked about the WNBA. So, with all that being said,
Stay brick.